On Saturday, April 6, Elon Musk provided a new update at Starbase on the current state and future development of Starship and discussed SpaceX's long-term plans. Elon began his presentation by reminding everyone that SpaceX is very serious about making humans a multi-planet civilization. Starship is the key to that, but there's a lot to work to do before Starship is operational and even more before it's ready to take people into the solar system. That first step in SpaceX's plan is to work out re-entry with the current version 1 design of Starship, and to that end, the goal of the fourth flight test will be to make it through re-entry and perform a controlled descent to the ocean's surface. Starship version 1, or Starship as we know it today, is limited to just 40 to 50 tons of payload capacity, well short of the 100 tons or greater that has been advertised for the Starship. Numerous changes are needed to upgrade Starship's performance, and that improved vehicle is Starship version 2. SpaceX's engineers are making thousands of design changes to the vehicles. The biggest of these improvements will be Raptor V3 for increasing thrust and reducing the dry mass fraction in both stages. To meet performance goals, the total propellant load on both vehicles will increase from 4,500 tons on Starship version 1 to 5,150 tons on version 2. Extrapolating from the graphics used during the presentation, it would appear that Starship's flaps are also being changed. The forward flaps are being moved further forward, and the root chord length is being reduced, creating a swept shape. Looking down at the base of Starship, it appears that the aft flaps will be enlarged, giving more surface area for control during re-entry. According to Elon, the version 2 Starship will probably be stretched possibly by 10 meters or more in future upgrades. SpaceX is a giant in the field of private space exploration, and they continue to surprise us throughout their operations. Right now, it's no exception. SpaceX and Elon Musk have finally unveiled the design of the new Starship prototype V3, unlike any other vision, and that gives us a clear view of the remarkable upgrades it brings. So, what has Elon just revealed about the new Starship V3? What makes it so impressive? What's the difference between Starship V3 and V2 and V1? Starship is currently the largest rocket ever built by humankind, including the first stage named Super Heavy, standing over 120 meters tall in total. SpaceX has conducted 3 orbital test flights so far. 2 took place in 2023, and the last one was in March, which was very successful. But Elon's company is now researching something even bigger. These are Starship V2 and V3, presented in the presentation slides. How will these guys differ from the current test design? First, you can see that Starship version 2 is slightly taller than the current prototype, with the spacecraft's height increased by an additional 2 meters, and the booster's height increased by 1.3 meters. The increased load-bearing capacity and thrust during liftoff enable it to carry more than 100 tons. The new version of Super Heavy is expected to provide about 15% more thrust than the booster used in the March test. In fact, Starship 2 will be the first version of SpaceX's rocket to operate fully and allow it to deliver cargo into space. Elon declared that SpaceX has launched more cargo into space than missions conducted by other companies or nations. When Starship can fly regularly, the success rate increases to 99%. However, looking at Starship 3, this is when some upgrades really come into play for a much taller spacecraft that looks like a clearly elongated version. With the thrust expected to be improved compared to Starship version 1 and version 2, Starship version 3 could increase from 7,000 tons of thrust to version 1 to over 8,000 tons of thrust for version 2. And eventually over 10,000 tons of thrust for version 3 as Elon shared during the presentation. This results in the payload capacity of Starship V3 doubling that of Starship V2, exceeding 200 tons, surpassing all current vehicles. Starship V3 will stand at 150 meters tall, instead of 124.4 meters of Starship V2, and 121.3 meters of V1. And it may even be taller than the current launch tower at Boca Chica. At that size, the 2 stages of Starship V3 are nearly identical. The fins also look slightly larger and may even be fixed in place. With these improvements, Starship V3 will accommodate 4,050 tons of fuel in the booster and 2,300 tons in the ship, larger than the 3,650 tons in the booster and 1,500 tons in Starship V2. In terms of engine count, V3 will feature 6 engines and 3 additional vacuum engines. Starship V2 and V1 will maintain 3 sea-level engines and 3 vacuum engines aboard. Another feature that we notice is the hot staging section of Starship V2 and Starship V3 differing from Starship V1. Instead of the original style vent-hole design, now the new version of Starship has an interface similar to the Soviet N1 style of the interstates that's incorporated on board. This has sparked much debate about the endurance of the increased gravitational force on Starship's capabilities when subjected to very high pressures during flight. However, these are just predictions, and we have to wait and see what SpaceX does next. And also in the graphic images, the various versions of Starship have shown us the answer to the speculation of the past when Elon Musk hinted about the new version of Starship. At that time, we speculated that the initial length in Starship would be part of the rumored V3 lineup that's currently in the design phase. Starship V2 wouldn't be produced and might get skipped. However, this is no longer accurate as Elon and SpaceX are definitely going to manufacture Starship V2 later this year and launch them by 2025. This could lead us to speculate that Starship V3 could potentially be manufactured in early 2025 and ready to go in 2026. Of course, this isn't merely speculation as we've recently seen the first hardware components of the new version of Starship at the build site, proving that SpaceX is ramping up work on Starship V2. Alongside the impressive capabilities of the new version of Starship, Elon Musk also mentioned another very important aspect that Starship will undoubtedly achieve in the future, which is maximizing cost reduction. Musk claimed that the future Starship V3 would cost less to launch than SpaceX's original rocket, the Falcon 1 small launch vehicle, which had a price tag of around $10 million because of full reusability. He estimated that the Starship cost per launch could fall as low as $2 million to $3 million. These are unthinkable numbers, but we're not breaking any physics to achieve this. Well, this is beyond our imagination. Moving down towards the booster, it appears in the graphic that the hot staging ring may be replaced with a taller truss structure similar to the N1 rocket's interstage section, which was also meant to accommodate hot staging. This, along with other changes in the vehicle, will increase the total stack by 3.1 meters to 124.4 meters. Further down the graphic, it appears that the new, larger grid fins were shown with a 60-degree offset change to 90 degrees, like Falcon 9's. These new grid fins seem to be positioned lower on Super Heavy than version 1 design, looking as if they are positioned underneath rather than on the top of the upper dome of the methane tank. Down at the bottom of the booster, SpaceX wants to eliminate the shielding around the engines, significantly reducing overall weight. The engines have been under a cycle of constant improvement from the beginning. Raptor 1 started with 185 tons of thrust and a very complicated arrangement of plumbing. The engine is more powerful, pushing thrust to 230 tons. Raptor 3 takes these trends even further to create an even more compact and powerful engine, producing a whopping 280 tons of thrust. In combination with this stated target, Raptor 3 will incorporate most of the secondary plumbing into the walls of the pumps and the thrust chamber jacket, following internal channels inside the walls. This is a much more difficult design to manufacture than Raptor 2. But it's a lot easier to integrate and helps enable much greater performance of Starship and Super Heavy with Raptor 3. Without the relatively delicate external plumbing, SpaceX also hopes to eliminate any need for engine shielding. After eliminating and redesigning so many parts, Raptor 3 should be even lighter than Raptor 2. And to top it all off, Elon is hoping perhaps, optimistically, to see Raptor taken to 330 tons of force, pushing Super Heavy to over 10,000 tons of thrust at liftoff. The goal of SpaceX's Starship is to build a fully reusable rocket, one that can deliver hundreds of times more payload to orbit than Falcon 1, while being even cheaper. Elon stated that their goal is to get the cost of a launch down to as low as $2 to $3 million. Countless technical decisions such as the use of autogenous pressurization and the simplification of components and engines are all done to help make this possible. It's the same kind of decision-making that SpaceX used to develop the Falcon 9, and it's let them achieve unparalleled launch rates. With Falcon, SpaceX is on track to deliver 90% of the world's up mass to orbit this year. With Starship V2 and a 100-ton payload capacity, that number will grow to 99% of the world's up mass. And with Starship version 3, SpaceX wants to take that even further, increasing payload capacity of the system to 200 tons. They'll need to stretch the stages to do it, but it won't be to the same degree as Falcon 9. As Elon said, Falcon 9 is a very tall rocket, and that length-to-width ratio is prohibitive. Still, the stack will be about 150 meters or almost 500 feet tall, a very tall rocket indeed. For instance, if a future Starship costs $2 million to build and $2 million for fuel-wide operations, and even in expanded mode, the payload cost would be $15 a kilogram. Now, considering a $3 million Starship capable of flying thousands of times, the cost would primarily revolve just around the fuel expenses for the flight and minimal overhead. By implementing systems for synthesizing liquid oxygen on site, fuel costs would be substantially reduced. For example, with an estimated $500,000 per orbital flight for fuel and 250 tons of reusable payload, the cost would range from $2 to $4 a kilogram. Similarly, for transcontinental flights, with fuel costs estimated around $125 per flight and the same payload capacity, the cost would be around 50 cents to $1 per kilogram. So that's the difference between if you've got a fully reusable rocket with low-cost propellant and autogenous pressurization, actually costs less. This provides an advantage that no other rocket in the world can match. But why aren't they building this rocket now? SpaceX probably doesn't want to skip V3 just yet, because Starship is still young, and they need to walk before they can run. There's a lot left to learn about how the vehicle performs during launch and landing, and many unknowns are waiting to be discovered. And the fact of the matter is, they won't need that full capacity until they start sending payloads other than just Starlink satellites into space. Ultimately, Starship V3 will be needed for Mars. Elon Musk founded SpaceX with the ultimate goal of getting humans to Mars. In the 20 years since the company's founding, Starship is the closest they've come to achieving that goal. During the presentation, Elon spoke on why humans needed to expand and become a multi-planet civilization. So why Mars? Humans need to live on another planet to insulate civilization against a fatal calamity that would doom a one-planet civilization. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of options. Venus is a staggeringly hot planet with an acidic atmosphere. It's just not possible to live on Venus's surface. At first glance, the Moon looks like a good choice. It's close, and there's a lot of resources of interest there, and SpaceX has every intention of building Moon-based Alpha. Unfortunately though, the Moon is still lacking in some key resources that would be needed to support a self-sustaining civilization, and it could be subject to a potential attack from Earth. A more distant celestial body will be more insulated from a civilization-ending disaster, natural or man-made. That leaves us with Mars. It's a real fixer-upper of a planet, but it's the only real choice. Elon went to explain what would be needed to colonize the red planet, and estimated that 1 million people would be needed to live on Mars. Mars, however, is not inherently habitable, and will take a tremendous amount of work to establish a colony. Millions of tons of cargo will be needed to produce an entire industrial base from scratch. With fleets of starships, this will become possible. One day, when a civilization on Mars can sustain itself without resupply from the Earth, SpaceX will have fulfilled its mission to spread and preserve civilization across multiple worlds. The cost has been a major barrier limiting access to space. Since the 1950s, the cost of traditional space programs made it inaccessible for most countries. And although SpaceX isn't the only private company doing launch services, it's emerged as one of the most important. Nowadays, humans have more opportunities to access space thanks to Starship, and this isn't just leaps and bounds achievable only by billionaires, but it's an opportunity for all of us. Starship will have an immediate impact once orbital testing is completed and safety certifications obtained. Launching satellites and resupply missions to the ISS will be the first steps, followed by sending humans beyond Earth to the Moon and even Mars. As early as 2026, Starship is slated for a lunar mission under a contract with NASA. It's a reusability and cost savings aligned with the agency's goal of establishing a more human presence on the Moon, making it a stepping stone for the future. Moreover, Starship itself will be the first outpost on these distant planets. Government planners won't have to worry too much about the emergency Starship, as it'll serve as a home on the Moon of Mars. Beyond interplanetary aspirations, Starship also revolutionizes transportation here on Earth. With its enormous capacity and rapid speed, the new version of Starship will expand transportation opportunities from one point to another, reducing transit times between distant points, of course. With a reasonable price and Starship being available to everyone, whether government or private entities. Of course, cheaper payloads into space will also lead to more affordable orbital tourism. First, commercial orbital stations will create more opportunities to host tourists. Second, tourists are going to be able to fly in Starship itself. In the not-too-distant future, SpaceX may very well achieve this goal. And that's about it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and that's all for today's update. If you enjoyed watching and found it useful, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. And if you want to support our channel and if you want to be up to date, you can become an exclusive member, so click on our perks through the link in the description below. Thanks to watching and see you next time.